we're always in partnership with Sound Transit and the state in terms of making our transportation system work. But for the local investments that we need to make, this strikes a really good balance between taking care of the infrastructure that we have and building for the city that we're becoming.
Check out that blast from the past. Former Seattle Department of Transportation Director Scott Kubley making a case for the Move Seattle levy in 2015, talking with me on the Seattle channel. Has that levy come through on its promises? What is it going to look like when it's up for renewal next year? The Seattle City Council considering those questions this week, plus a new plan for bridge maintenance, a stalled-out plan for a capital gains tax at the city level, and some heartbreaking, or more accurately, heart-unhealthy news about driving in Seattle area traffic. We are looking at those stories and so much more this week on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I am a host on the Seattle channel, and the views expressed here are mine. And I am here with my co-host, David Croman of the Seattle Times. And I just wanted to follow up on this, David, about how you're doing during the monsoon season here in Seattle. I enjoyed an exciting rain-soaked evening unclogging drains on our roof last night. I just wanted to make sure I checked in on how you're doing.
I'm sorry to hear that. We're doing okay. It doesn't mean that our dog walks are kind of wet.
Yeah, it is a soggy paws time of year, that's for sure. Well, David, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. A shout out to Alice this week. Thank you for sticking with us since March of last year. Your support helps keep this enterprise rolling. I'm hoping to hear from more patrons by the end of the year. Support the show at the $5 level and get your very own awesome Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. What? You can actually find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon to learn more. Thank you very much. Thanks also to Converge Media. The video version of the podcast is on Converge. Check it out Wednesday nights at 7. And we are rolling here, folks. It's time for Right Here, Right Now. Well, David, my transportation reporter friend, we are going transportation heavy this week as the Seattle City Council considers a number of important issues in its Transportation Committee meeting. First up here, an update on the Move Seattle levy, that levy that came to voters in 2015 as a $930 million 9-year measure, at the time the largest in city history. When you look through the SDOT's presentation on how the levy has actually performed, it looks solid on paper, meeting or exceeding the mark on 27 out of 30 programs set forth by the levy. But there are some nagging points to consider. The bike program got close to its goals, not quite there. Multimodal goals, not going to happen by 2024. And it's really falling short on perhaps its most vital goal, Vision Zero, eliminating traffic fatalities. This was launched in 2015 as well as part of the levy. And sure, you've got some projects completed, but the numbers don't lie. SDOT admits it in its presentation. Seattle is, quote, no closer to meeting the goal of eliminating traffic-related deaths than it was in 2015. David, before we get into what the city might be asking for or should be asking for with this next transportation levy, what's your assessment of how the 2015 levy is done?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was kind of a low point for the Move Seattle levy around the time that Jenny Durkin became mayor. And I think compared to that, there's this reset where basically they declared that the previous administration had kind of overpromised what was going to be able to be delivered in that. And I think since that, there has been some legitimately positive news. They are back to thinking that they can achieve a lot of what they originally promised. You mentioned a few places where it's falling short. I'll add that, they say that they're going to meet their goals on the bridge upgrades, but that's slightly misleading because they're hitting the number of bridges that they said, or they're going to hit the number of bridges, but they've shifted the focus to smaller, cheaper bridges. So there's a little bit of gamesmanship in that one, and I think that's been pointed out, and they'll acknowledge that no, they're not getting to I think Ballard Bridge being the big one, but are getting to some other bridges. For me, the kind of interesting thing about it, and this sort of will relate to how big the next one is going to be, is just their ability to get dollars out the door. And we've talked a little bit about that before. Just what they're spending every year, or really every quarter. They set a goal for how much they want to spend and how much work they want to get out on the streets. And they have really not hit those on basically any quarters for, there was the concrete strike and COVID and supply chain and weather. And, there's a lot of reasons for it. But at the end of the day, they have a lot of money that they need to get out of the door in not a lot of time, and I think that's going to be a bit of a sprint for the department.
Yeah, and we're going to touch a little bit more on the bridge topic in our next discussion item here, but thank you for bringing that up. But I did want to follow up on this other piece of it because the Levy Oversight Committee is going to make some recommendations on how much the city should be asking for from voters with this levy in 2024. And in terms of not passing it, not really an option because SDOT relies on this levy for just about 30% of its operating budget. That's a big, big number out there. And so I'm thinking about this, David. We need investments in transportation, but I just feel like this new council that's coming on board certainly did not get elected by touting bold, let's increase our spending kind of plans out there. I'm just trying to figure out from your perspective, where does this levy end up? Is it going to be bigger? Is it going to be more like the 2018 reset and be more cautious, a more, quote, realistic figure? What do you think comes out of this?
Yeah, I think it could and probably will be bigger just because of inflation, and it's not 2015 anymore. But I don't think I would be surprised, I guess I'd say, if it's significantly bigger, only because of that point I brought before, which is there's a bit of a disconnect. You could pass a $3 billion Move Seattle levy, and in some ways it wouldn't really matter because there's no way you're going to be able to spend that. They're going to be able to spend that much money every year. They just don't have the crew or the supplies to do it. And, weather is an issue, and we don't live in LA. It's pretty nasty for a lot of the year. So, that kind of slows projects. And so I think it will get better, but there is a ceiling on how big they can go. And SDOT has acknowledged this. Just again, back to when you're not hitting your goals basically any quarter for how much you want to spend, that suggests that there is an upper limit on how much money you could actually spend in a finite amount of time.
Yeah, and paired with this, I'm going to segue to that bridge concept you were bringing up earlier here, David, because this is also on the docket for the Transportation Committee this week. A related issue, the city's plan for its ailing and sometimes failing bridges. SDOT's presenting this update this week, a response to the 2020 audit that said Seattle needed a more strategic approach to maintaining bridge infrastructure. Sounds good. But, David, I was really struck by the fact that even after all the investment that Seattle is talking about in terms of maintenance with this report, there's this list of 37 bridges that need to be replaced. I'm talking straight up replaced over the next 10 to 30 years. And they are not small projects here. We're talking about the Magnolia Bridge, the Ballard Bridge. We're talking about that as well, as you mentioned, Westlake Avenue North. And I guess I'm trying to figure out what sort of plan, and I need to put very big air quotes around that, what sort of plan can not only identify what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, but actually pay for that infrastructure. I feel like we're coming back to this question too.
Yeah, the council did something kind of interesting in the budget, which was reducing the payments that they're making to the city's pension plan,
right,
down to kind of minimum levels to divert some of that money toward bridge maintenance. That when you're talking about full replacement of $400 million bridges, it's not really getting the city that much closer to that. Probably once upon a time there was some hope that there would be a lot more state money, but I don't know that that's going to happen. I mean, that's something that WashDOT has been raising concerns about, which is most of the transportation dollars at the state level are going towards either new or ongoing mega projects.
Yeah.
520, so on and so forth, culverts. And there's not really a sort of proportionate amount of maintenance and preservation dollars that theoretically could be spent on things like the Magnolia Bridge. Mm-hmm. So I don't frankly know where this money is going to come from. And I do think, I'd be curious with this new council, how they view it. I would say the new council is more in the mold of, say, Alex Peterson, and that has been a big topic of his. So, if there was a kind of quote mandate that came of the elections, I don't think this council is going to come in and be super ideological. I think it is they were elected on sort of messages of, the pothole messages or whatever. We got to get out of the business of resolutions about Gaza and get into fixing our roads or whatever. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there was kind of more focus on, and I, frankly, who knows, maybe the next Move Seattle levy, that'll just be all it goes towards, is just for bridges. It's up to this council to decide that.
Yeah, and let me keep going down that path here because there's a lot to take in. I'm looking at this report about bridges, healthy 29 pages there, and it just has me thinking, who is going to be that chair of the Transportation Committee on the new council? Because we've got these moderate candidates for most part winning these seats, but I just wouldn't describe any of them as policy wonks who have a sense of this incredibly wonky world of transportation. I could be totally wrong on that. But do you have any thoughts about this? Who might best serve as the council's transportation chair with Alex Peterson leaving?
No, I don't. I don't really know enough about what the interest is or have, I could see Dan Strauss maybe being interested.
Does he give up land use? I see what you're saying. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. He's worked on, Burt Gilman stuff. Maybe I don't have any insight into that. Maybe he's happy where he is.
Yeah. He was vice chair of the transportation committee this year, but yeah, keep going.
Right. And as part of the transportation committee, I guess they could always rejigger the committees. Whoever that is would get utilities also. That utilities often go to the lowest, the kind of
the lowest person
on the totem pole.
Yeah.
That said, 6 new people. So there is basically the whole totem pole is at the lowest.
There's a lot of room on the pole, right?
So I don't frankly know. I don't know enough about the new council members and what their interests are.
Yeah, it's just going to be one of those interesting questions going forward here, because certainly you've got some different people coming in with different expertise, but this is one there's a lot of catch up here in terms of a learning curve for transportation. So I'll be interested to see how that happens as well. All right, well, coming up next, the outgoing transportation chair, Alex Peterson, had some plans to add some new revenue sources to the city's coffers, but the plan didn't quite work out as he thought it would. We're talking about that story next on Now Hear This. Well, outgoing council member Alex Peterson had a plan. Let's pass a city-based capital gains tax and use those revenues to replace the water tax the city levies on Seattle Public Utilities customers. His idea was to make our tax system more equitable in that way. But the fact that the city's even considering a capital gains tax is based on a state capital gains tax, effective since January of 2022, but now under fire via a statewide initiative effort to try to repeal it. So Peterson said, okay, we better let that fight at the state settle out, which means a delay in considering this measure at the city level until next year at the earliest.
While we're not voting on these two bills this year, the bills are well crafted and ready for action by the next year's city council to consider, so they can make our tax system more fair and progressive once our statewide leaders ensure that their progress on tax reform has safely solidified.
And when we consider next year, that means Alex Peterson is not going to be there. And so I guess, again, David, I'm considering this new council coming in and wondering if this measure from Councilmember Peterson goes anywhere in 2024. Do you think it has legs for next year with its primary sponsor out of the picture?
I think maybe not. I don't know if that has so much to do with Alex Peterson leaving as it does with this initiative that might be on the ballot that would repeal the capital gains tax.
They still need to get signatures, et cetera. But yeah, keep going.
Right. But it is a real threat. It's sort of an interesting timing for the council because they're going to have to figure out this budget gap, but also, so do they use something like a capital gains to do that, knowing that there's a threat that it could be repealed shortly after? I don't know. The water tax thing is interesting. And I think that's a common approach by people who are generally seen as more moderate, which is, at the state level, a lot of progressives want to do a capital gains tax, whereas the more moderate folks would support a capital gains tax while balancing it with reducing, say, a business and
other
tax or something like that. Doesn't surprise me. The water tax is interesting because, on the one hand, it is regressive because everybody uses water. On the other hand, the biggest water users in the city are not single family homes. It's big companies. It is industry. So in some ways, the where this tax is coming from the most is like, I think, Amazon probably.
Yeah, right. That's a good observation. Yeah.
So I don't know. I frankly, I'll admit that until Alex Peterson brought this up, I didn't know there was a water tax in Seattle.
Neither did I. Totally.
That was new to me. So yeah, I don't know where that proposal goes. I wouldn't be surprised if generally conversations around capital gains tax, though, slowed a little bit in the wake of a real possibility that they just won't be allowed soon.
Yeah, and it was interesting to hear in this council meeting last week and talking about it, Councilmember Nelson said, I thought we were going to vote on this week, and I would have voted no. So she is definitely positing herself as someone who opposes these capital gains taxes. But at a certain point, just coming back to this point you made earlier, David, I keep thinking about that $200 million budget gap that the city is going to have presented to it next year. And we're past the election now, right? I mean, these are council members that are going to have to make that decision. if it's not the capital gains tax, then are there going to be these discussions about seeking out more revenue? Where do you get it from? Are we going to be looking at more cuts? I think this conversation is going to be ongoing from the council right when they get into office.
Yeah, for sure. Because they don't really have a choice, and a year is not that long before they have to figure this out. So I don't know if this is the job that the council members wanted when they were elected, but no one runs for office to cut. I don't know where those cuts come from. I do think the odds that we see a bigger jumpstart tax or whatever have probably gone down with this new council. I would say the odds there's new tax in general have probably gone down quite a bit, especially if they're thinking about the Move Seattle levy. I don't know. There tends to be, we saw this with Mayor Durkin, actually, just hesitance to do two tax bumps or revenue bumps at the same time. So I wouldn't be surprised if they chose the Move Seattle levy as that one and then try to cut or whatever it might be elsewhere.
Yeah. And I mean, we just went through the process of seeing the housing levy increase significantly. So, yeah, I think you're right. There's a pacing to these different increases that the city considers when it's looking at revenue. And yeah, I wanted to make sure I brought it up because this is a conversation that is not going away for the council in terms of revenue cuts, all of these things. And we'll see where this new council engages with that topic over the next couple of months here. All right. Well, we're going to continue with our roundup of outgoing council members trying to pass stuff before they're out of office. And here's Councilmember Lewis's plan before the full council this week on limiting the personal guarantees and security deposits that commercial tenants have to pay when they lease a place. This is pretty interesting. I wanted to break this down with you, David. So that personal guarantee, folks, is tied to a person, not a business. In some cases, they'll agree to a personal guarantee of 5 years duration when they lease out a place, but then the business only lasts for 3. Well, guess what? They keep paying that amount even if some of these spaces get leased again right away. So that's a big issue there. Security deposits, you have an idea of what those are. But overall, Lewis's bill would limit the maximum personal guarantee to 2 years of rent payments and the cost of tenant improvements to a space. It would also limit security deposits to the amount of first and last month's rent combined. The goal here, trying to make things simpler for smaller businesses, many in the BIPOC community who have reached out to Lewis's office, trying to get in on commercial leases. But David, I thought this was interesting because even the city is asking in its staff analysis here. This applies to businesses of all sizes who are trying to get in on the market here. And it's not clear that the small businesses you might want to help would be ready to roll and first in line for this benefit as some of the larger, more resourced businesses out there might be. I guess just looking at that, some thoughts, some concerns here about what Councilmember is trying to do when it comes to these business leases.
Yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot of great options, I guess, for helping individual businesses make it right
gift
now.
Of public funds and things like that. Yeah, there's limits on that for sure.
Yeah, and they've always struggled with this. So we see, things like advisory grants or things like that, consulting help or whatever it might be. But as far as sort of direct contributions to, small businesses, there's not a lot to do. And so this is kind of feels a little bit like nibbling at the edges of that because, this was a problem before the pandemic and is especially so now. Just how do you get businesses back up and running and get people, especially I think for chains or things like that, they just have a little more capital on hand so it can weather storms. These small businesses can't do that. And so trying to limit how much sort of upfront cash you need to survive in this market right now.
Yeah, it's significant, and I wanted to make sure I pointed out, too, there are other concerns brought up by the city as well, including if these regulations are indeed passed and then laid on landlords, it could very well lead to them saying, I'm not able to get this guaranteed income as easily. Maybe it's time to raise rents or increase maintenance fees to make sure I'm covered here. I guess I'm looking at that side of it, too. The people who are actually leasing out the places, they in some cases could be small businesses, too, and this could have an impact on them as well. Do you see that part of the picture?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's always the kind of push and pull with these tenant landlord laws. Leasers, commercial lease right now are, I think, also not doing very well, or at least,
right.
An environment that's not very friendly. So, yeah, I don't, this seems like something that I don't know, I haven't been tracking it super closely. It seems like something that probably won't get done before Councilmember Lewis gets out of office. Maybe you have different insight into that. And again, this new council is going to be a lot more sympathetic, I think, to a landlord point of view, it is interesting that it's sort of two business interests kind of competing against each other.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, this is we hear this every time we talk about tenant landlord balances. How do you create a better environment for the tenants while also making it so there's some incentive for landlords to do this work?
Right. Yeah, and it's basically trying to build back these different neighborhoods. We've talked a little bit about trying to fill up empty spaces downtown. Other neighborhoods are going through this too as we emerge from the COVID pandemic. So I think you're right. It's this idea of trying to strike this balance between, making sure lessors have the right protections in place for their businesses, but then making sure that people are actually able to lease these places too. It looks like this might have enough gas to pass the finish line before the council breaks next week, but we will be keeping an eye on this one, David, because this is one of those that I know Councilmember Lewis would very much like to pass. Does he have the votes? It looks like he may, but I'll keep track of this one as well. All right, I wanted to move on to our next story here. Driving in Seattle traffic. Not good for your blood pressure, but the reason why might not be what you think. David's taking us on a trip with this one, coming up on Transportation Talk. All right, so David, the traffic we have, the environment we live in, health news actually all coming together this week with your report in the Seattle Times about how driving in the Seattle area can actually increase your blood pressure, but it's not necessarily because it's so stressful. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a good amount of literature on how highway pollution and exhaust is bad for your health. It seems to lead to more strokes and heart attacks. It's not always a great insight into why. This was trying to sort of test specifically the effect of that pollution on blood pressure.
This is a UW study, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a UW study. So they, did it in a closed environment, basically put people in rooms and piped some amount of diesel fumes into the rooms and saw a blood pressure spike, but, wanted to test it in the real world. So they took people on 3 different drives, and on one of the drives, you put a HEPA filter and, made it so the air was really clean. And 2 of the drives, they didn't do that. So the idea being, you're sort of controlling for the general blood pressure increases that might come with just being stressed out in traffic. And testing, specifically the pollution, what happens if you clean up the air. And they saw, enough of a spike that the researcher I talked to compared it to basically switching from a low salt to a high salt diet. So, unclear how long of an effect that, how lingering that effect is, whether that is something that could lead to, long-term health implications is not proven by this study, but it does show that pollution appears to have at least, a statistically significant effect on your blood pressure.
Yeah, and I really thought the point you were making towards the end of this piece, David, was very cogent in terms of basically where we go from here, because this is an issue where people might say, it's just a couple of percentage points. That really is not that big a deal. But I think a lot of different agencies are paying attention to this, especially the federal government investing $1 billion in some of these programs to try to reduce the environmental impact of some of our transportation infrastructure on people who live in different communities, especially communities where, hey, you just plowed I-5 right through my neighborhood, and look at that. There's a lot of impact from that on my neighborhood. So I think figuring that out and looking at how less resourced communities are being affected by this, certainly the feds are paying attention to this, and I think that's a very important part of this.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of a small and a large implication to this story. The small implication is cars could probably use better filtration systems because it appears to not be very good for your health to be sitting in traffic and you're breathing in basically the exhaust of the traffic around you. That's kind of that's real, and commuters probably should be concerned about that. The big implication, though, is it's communities that live near highways or arterials even. You can zoom out a little further and look at where Seattle's putting most of its dense housing. It tends to be along arterials in places with a lot of car traffic. And so, the next logical question is, well, okay, so we know that there is at least an acute impact on blood pressure when you're breathing pollution. What does it do to you when you're breathing that basically all the time, which some communities are? The sort of logic would lead to perhaps it's not very good for your health. And, we see that in health outcomes of communities that live near highways, but, exactly connecting blood pressure to that, I think probably needs a little more research, but it certainly raises some kind of large questions around, this is kind of environmental justice in a nutshell, which is low income and communities of color tend to be the ones that live near these highways and therefore have kind of more negative health outcomes as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. And I talked about the federal dollars that are being put towards this on a national level, but I really feel like this discussion about the environment and how it affects us and how traffic exhaust affects us is a continuing part of the local conversation too. And I think you brought this up in your piece as well. Things like lidding I-5, things of this nature, trying to make it a better situation for people walking around that area or driving for that matter, I suppose. I guess talk to me about that as we talk about all these investments with Move Seattle or whatever else. Do you think that environment, how we interact with it, how traffic affects us from a health perspective, is that going to be part of the more localized conversation about this going forward?
Yeah, I think so. And it is already to an extent. You mentioned lit off I-5. There's the South Park, Reconnect South Park effort, which has been pushing, their biggest goal was to tear out a portion of Highway 99 down there and, turn it into usable land. The sort of scaled back vision would be another lid that could kind of reconnect the two halves of that neighborhood. And there's money behind that. There's state money and there's city money and federal money all towards studying that. So it's not totally aspirational. I mean, there's several $1 million to actually study this and see what could happen. So, the federal government has taken an interest. As you mentioned, there's about $1 billion in the infrastructure bill. $1 billion spread across the whole country is an extremely small amount of money. I think originally the proposal was $13 billion. So, $1 billion sounds like a lot. It's really not a lot because, lidding, you look at 520 or Montlake, what's happening. They're building a lid there. That's hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. So, you could spend $1 billion just in South Park fairly easily. They're not going to do that. But yeah, I mean, there is at the very least some national recognition of what highways have done to communities and what that means for the people that live near them.
Yeah, no, this is an important conversation. I really appreciated that article, David. And it is time to wrap up here, my friend. So the Mariners trades keep on coming, and we just need to keep on talking about them. I got to ask, were you sad to see Jared Kelenic get traded to the Braves, a one-time can't-miss top prospect for the Mariners, or do you think it was time for him to go? What do you got?
I think I would have not. I would have been fine trading him. It makes me sad that it was for money, essentially. Yeah,
who are we getting with these guys? Right.
Yeah, no, the actual players that came back are, I mean, some of them have some promise and could end up being, but that's not really what the trades were. It was just a cash dump. And so that's frustrating that these are not baseball decisions. These are business decisions. And, at the time when we should be building, it's frustrating to see that we're subtracting. So, they can be redeemed. The Mariners can still redeem themselves in my eyes if they go out and do something kind of big and cool. But right now, I would say I feel about as badly about the team as I can remember.
I know. There's a lot of people gone. Marco Gonzalez gone as well. We talked about Suarez last week. This is it's interesting for a team that's been so close to the playoffs to watch him shed so many players like that. That's an interesting thing to watch. But as you say, let's wait for them to totally redeem themselves. I can't wait for something big this winter, and we'll see where it goes. But David, thank you so much for helping me out here as always. And thanks to everyone listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. The podcast is on Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen, we are there. And also, please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Make sure you show your support. Very important to have that. And thanks for watching on Converge Media, too. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.